All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're unpacking a literal seismic shift in modern football history. We're rewinding back to the year 2000. Now, obviously, the rivalry between Real Madrid and Barcelona was already incredibly fierce before this. We all know that. But the 2000-2001 season, it took things to an entirely new, almost unimaginable level. It basically transformed a bitter national feud into this massive, heavily commercialized global spectacle. And honestly, it all started with a single, unthinkable transfer that completely blurred the lines between sport, politics, and just absolute betrayal. Let's look at how one player's decision permanently altered the legacy of the sport. To really wrap our heads around the gravity of this moment, we have to understand the sheer raw emotion involved. This quote brilliantly captures the utter devastation felt in Catalonia at the time. This is from Joan Gaspart, who'd actually just taken over as Barcelona's president. He said, "Figo left as a traitor. He did not appreciate how much the fans loved him. He made the wrong decision and the fans will never forgive him." You see, Luís Figo wasn't just some great player for Barcelona. He was their guy. He was their beloved talisman, their captain. He just led them to back-to-back league titles in 98 and 99. So for him to up and leave for their absolute fiercest rivals, that wasn't just a loss of talent. It was viewed as the ultimate treason.
Section 1. The Impossible Election Promise.
So, how exactly does the unthinkable actually happen? Let's jump to the summer of 2000 and look at the utter audacity of this statement. Florentino Perez was this underdog candidate running for the presidency of Real Madrid. He was up against the highly popular incumbent, Lorenzo Sanz, who had literally just won the Champions League. So Perez needed a miracle to win this election. And his miracle was a pre-election promise that sounded like pure fantasy. If I am president, Figo will be a player of Real Madrid. He was promising to steal the absolute best player from their arch-rivals. I mean, nobody believes you could actually pull it off, but Perez had a very, very cunning plan up his sleeve.
Here's where it gets interesting, the actual mechanics of the deal. It was basically a giant trap. Figo, who was feeling pretty undervalued financially at Barcelona, and his agent, Jose Vega, were approached by Perez's camp. Now, believing Perez had absolutely zero chance of actually winning the election, they saw an opportunity. They essentially agreed to sign a pre-contract with Perez, thinking, hey, we can use this massive financial offer as leverage to force Barcelona to give Figo a better contract. It was a massive, high-stakes gamble. But the trap snapped shut when Perez actually orchestrated a shock victory at the polls. Suddenly, Figo and his agent were contractually locked in. That impossible promise suddenly had to become a reality.
Moving on to Section 2, Football's Ultimate Betrayal.
Boom. The trap is sprung and the sporting world is turned entirely upside down. There was no going back for Luís Figo or Barcelona. And just look at this number, 60 million euros. That's the world record transfer fee that ultimately forced Barcelona's hand. Because Perez had successfully activated Figo's buyout clause, Barcelona's newly elected president, Joan Gaspart, was completely powerless to stop it. Gaspart desperately promised to keep Figo, tried to extend his contract, but a release clause is a release clause. Once that money was deposited, Barcelona had absolutely no legal right to stop their captain from walking right into the Santiago Bernabeu. The sheer weight of that cash shattered the previous transfer record and instantly redefined the entire football market.
Now, what's absolutely fascinating here is the split screen of reactions. We're looking at two entirely different realities. Over in Barcelona, this was an apocalyptic betrayal. I mean, Figo had publicly kissed the Barcelona badge just weeks prior, claiming he was staying put. To see him paraded in a white shirt, it was a devastating psychological blow. But flip over to the other side, for Real Madrid, this was the ultimate flex. It was a massive statement of unmatched ambition and financial muscle. It wasn't just about getting a world-class winger. It was about systematically weakening their biggest rival while simultaneously blasting their own status into the stratosphere. Section 3. The 2000-2001 title campaign. But hey, beyond all that crazy boardroom drama, there was an actual football season to be played, right? Under head coach Vicente del Bosque, Real Madrid was about to put all that new ambition right onto the pitch. Take a look at the data from that domestic campaign. This outlines Real Madrid's absolute commanding march to their 28th La Liga title, which was actually their first since 1997. In 38 matches, they secured 24 wins, racked up a massively impressive plus 41 goal differential, and finished with 80 total points. They didn't just buy a superstar, they integrated him into a squad that functioned ruthlessly. After all the chaos of the summer, Del Bosque somehow managed to keep the team focused on domestic dominance, and this data absolutely proves how formidable they were that year.
And just look at the ridiculous concentration of talent on this roster. Yes, of course, Figo was the headline. He scored 9 meat goals, led the charge, and even presented his Ballon d'Or to the Bernabeu crowd midway through the season. But look at the foundation built around him. You had the incredible Raul, who netted 24 league goals and 32 overall. You had Claude Makelele, brought in for what now looks like a bargain 14 million euros, who became the absolute engine of that midfield. You had Goody dropping in 14 goals, playing right alongside absolute legends like Roberto Carlos and a young Iker Casillas in goal. This wasn't just a team, it was a carefully constructed machine.
Now, while their domestic campaign was a resounding triumph, their European journey had a slightly more abrupt ending. They entered the season as defending champions, comfortably advanced through 2 group stages and the quarterfinals, but they were narrowly knocked out in the semifinals by Bayern Munich. Still, even with that knockout, the overall strength and dominance of this squad had been firmly established on the global stage. Which brings us to Section 4, the camp now return. Goals and trophies aside, the most visceral, unforgettable narrative of this entire era was Luís Figo's absolutely terrifying return to Barcelona. Let's map this timeline out, because the hostility didn't just happen once, it escalated. On October 21st, 2000, Figo returned to the Camp Nou for the first time. The noise was literally deafening. Every single time he touched the ball, the whistling was piercing. Barca actually won that match 2-0, and notably, Figo did not take the corner kicks that day because the environment was just deemed way too dangerous. But here's the thing, the anger didn't dissipate over time. Over a 2-year gap, it fermented. When he returned again in November 2002, he did decide to take the corners, leading to an incident that completely halted the match and etched this rivalry into infamy forever. To really get inside Barcelona's collective headspace regarding the chaos, check out this quote. This is from their manager at the time, Louis van Gaal. Following the suspension of that infamous match, the Barcelona side actually blamed Figo for the riots. Van Gaal stated, "Figo provoked the fans, he walked over to the corner really slowly, picked up the bottles slowly, all this consciously and deliberately." So, from Barcelona's perspective, Figo's very presence, his whole demeanor, and his refusal to rush his corner kicks were viewed as acts of sheer, deliberate provocation meant to incite the entire stadium. So what did this so-called provocation actually look like on the pitch? Well, let's look at the atmosphere of what the Spanish media quickly dubbed the Derby of Shame, or the Bronx No. The intensity was so incredibly raw that police literally had to be stationed at the corner flags, holding full riot shields. Whenever Figo approached the line, he was met with a constant hail of coins, lighters, glass bottles, just debris. And then, perhaps the most infamous, bizarre visual in the history of El Clasico, an actual severed suckling pig's head was hurled onto the pitch from the stands. I mean, you literally cannot make this stuff up. The referee was completely forced to suspend the match for over 10 minutes. It was human drama on an unprecedented, frankly terrifying scale.
Section 5. Legacy of the Galácticos.
So, why are we still talking about this today? Why does this matter? Because this single, highly charged timeline completely altered the global trajectory of the sport. The legacy of the 2001 season goes way, way beyond a single league title. This transfer essentially weaponized the cultural divide in Spain. Historically, Catalan frustration with the centralized Spanish state was, a broader political issue. But as analysts note, the Figo transfer redirected a massive amount of that political and cultural frustration squarely onto Real Madrid as a football club. Real Madrid became the direct, living symbol of the power and dominance that Catalans had long opposed. The football rivalry was no longer just about regional pride. It became deeply, uncomfortably personal. And this essentially built the modern game as we know it today. Let's look at these long-term impacts. First, this exact transfer kick-started Florentino Perez's Galáctico era, that deliberate, massive strategy of signing a global superstar every single summer. Second, this deep, bitter hostility actually ended up benefiting both clubs commercially. It transformed El Clasico from a really intense local rivalry into the most-watched football match on the planet outside of the World Cup. It established the absolute blueprint for modern hostile mega transfers. And finally, it serves as a permanent cautionary tale. Even today, Figo's legacy is effectively erased from the Barcelona Museum. It completely, totally shattered the illusion of romantic player loyalty.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on as we wrap up. Did the 2000-2001 season permanently trade traditional club loyalty for a massive global spectacle? By proving that, enough money and ambition could literally rip a captain from the arms of a club that adored him, did Real Madrid and Florentino Perez create a more entertaining product at the cost of the sport's soul? The hostilities certainly pushed both clubs to chase unprecedented global commercial dominance, but the echoes of that betrayal and, that pig's head resting on the grass, they remain loud and clear today. Take that question with you, and thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.